Kia ora and welcome to Tower Sector Report. We tackle the weather. Was our autumn as dry and sunny as it seemed? And why did we have that snow down south and flooding in the North Island last spring? Learn more from our own Country 99 TV weather analyst Philip Duncan, who answers those questions and looks ahead over the next few months to tell us what to expect in the absence of both the La Nina and El Nino weather patterns. Also in this program, we tackle the question of rural broadband as telecommunications companies limber up for the rollout of ultra-fast rural broadband. Paul Brislin of the Telecommunications Users Association brings us up to speed and offers his prediction as to when rural New Zealand will be fully connected. And Tower Sector Report correspondent Drew Chappell investigates a booming rural sector, hobby farming. Drew finds owners of lifestyle blocks range from retirees to urban professionals and returning expats. And the land's being snapped up for lifestyle blocks, skyrocketing from 27,000 properties in 1977 to 200,000 today. But first, more from our weather analyst, Philip Duncan. Well, Philip, welcome to Tower Sector Report. Nice to have you away from the weather set for our news for a change. Now, let's begin by not trying to divine the future, but have a look at the weather farmers have faced since last spring. We had some pretty major events. Were these expected?
Yeah, they pretty much were. La Nina seems to define itself by having long dry periods and then boom, big low comes down, and that's really what we've had. You go through these big long periods where you sort of wonder when the next rain cloud's going to appear, and then you get your month's rainfall, if not twice your month's rainfall in a 24 to 48 hour period, and really that's what we've seen since about December last year.
Well, we had before that though, we had the floods in Manawatu, which I went down and covered. That's right. And of course that dreadful snowstorm in Southland. So it was a pretty rough spring, wasn't it?
It was, and that one in September, the big one that caused that snowstorm, killed 500,000 lambs in Southland. Yeah. That was really a huge Southern Ocean storm, not part of La Nina. Oh, that normally would be sort of circling close to Antarctica, but this one came up and it just sideswiped Southland, and it didn't hit other areas with that snow. It did hit with wind, and there were tornadoes reported up in Waikato, and a lot of farmers that I spoke to had damage with trees and barns and all that sort of carry on. So it was a rough September and then a very, very quiet October and November when people started to get a little bit nervous because the rain clouds stopped, the wind stopped, and so much for a windy spring.
Yeah, I mean, for a while there it was looking threateningly dry. I mean, there were no drought declarations that I can recall, were there?
There was a drought declared in parts of Northland and Ruapehu district, but they were at the lower end. But yeah, there was a concern, certainly with the fact that it was so dry heading into December. That's always a worry, you know, when you've got low water tables. And despite some of the rain events that we had in December and January, farmers I was speaking to in February were still reporting rainfall levels were normal, but they were in a deficit, you know, with the water table in the ground. So I'm sure that is now reversed with the recent rain that we've had. Yeah,
we've certainly had our fill of it just lately.
Absolutely.
If you look back over these last 8 months or so, did Met Service do a decent job in warning farmers of these events? Let's say the snowstorm down in Southland.
I think overall Met Service aren't bad with their warnings. In fact, I've got more faith in their warnings than in their forecast, their day-to-day forecast.
Why is that?
I don't know. I think because they probably have more manpower going into them. I actually don't know how many people they use to create them all, but I know that they do have some good software, some good computer models that they rely on, and I found that their warnings have been fairly accurate. I don't go as high as what they think. They have a 97% accuracy rate, but then they are judging their own accuracy. So
that's with warnings?
With warnings only, yeah.
Right. What's their rate with forecasts?
I actually don't know. I think
they claim high 80s.
I think they claim high 80s as well. Right. You know, I think the public might have a different opinion on that. I think it depends on where you live. Every region is different with the accuracy, and we find the same at Weatherwatch as well. With that storm in September, I don't think they did a great job with the snowstorm. No. My recollection is that the snow warning came out about quarter of an hour before the Stadium Southland roof collapsed. So for the fact that they knew there was some sort of snow coming, I was surprised that they were so late with that warning. Right. And a lot of farmers were caught off guard, but in Met Service's defence, they did indicate in their severe weather outlook snow was on the way. The problem with it with I think their severe weather outlooks though, is that unless you're looking at it, you're not going to know it's there because the media don't pick up on it necessarily. Weatherwatch tries to, but we don't always get, because some things are not relevant perhaps for the mainstream reader. So it is difficult sometimes in a country like New Zealand to get those warnings out for some of the smaller regions.
Yeah. Now, of course, we're okay now. There's been plenty of rain, despite what seems to have been actually quite a dry autumn. We seem to have had, certainly up here in Auckland, just sunny day after sunny day. But am I right in my perception there?
Well, you're right in the perception that it seemed dry, but it wasn't. It was actually quite wet. And in fact, in March in particular, I thought March was a dry month. And I remember even being interviewed somewhere and I said, oh, you know, it was a pretty dry month. And I got a text message almost immediately after leaving the studio to say, actually, you need to check NIWA's rainfall figures, because just because where you lived was a bit drier, it actually wasn't. And sure enough, it was. It was average to above average in March. April was, I believe, above average overall. And that's what...
This is over both islands?
Yeah, both islands. Most regions, not all regions, but most regions were average to above average, and it's because La Nina produces these big rainmakers. They come out of the tropics, they're saturated, and with the big highs that we get around summer, the lows can't move through quickly. And you know, we had 6 named tropical storms this year that came down. Not a record breaker, 8 was our record, but certainly a lot of tropical moisture which made up for those big dry weeks that we had in between.
Yeah. Now, the weather leading up to and after Christmas was La Nina. I guess we should all know what that means, but I, for one, remain confused. How does it work? And for that matter, how does the system's brother, El Nino, work?
All right, so La Nina is basically defined as a cooling of the equatorial Pacific Ocean. So where the equator is, where the Pacific Ocean is there, the water cools, and it goes 3 or 4 degrees below average. It doesn't sound like a lot, but actually with a cyclone, if a cyclone's passing over water and it goes over water that's 1 degree warmer, the cyclone status could jump 3 levels.
Right.
So it does have a huge impact, that drop. So with La Nina, the temperature drops around the equator because the warm water has been blown westwards, blown towards Australia and New Zealand. So the northern Tasman Sea and the Coral Sea towards Fiji, that area, very warm, much warmer than average. And this year, the average temperature around Cairns was about 33, 34 degrees, which is unbelievably warm.
Yeah.
With El Nino, it's the other way around. That warm water around New Zealand and Australia gets blown eastwards towards South America. And so they end up getting the big, wet, warm winter, and we end up, summer, and then we end up with the dry, windy sort of weather. We get lots of highs in the Tasman, we get droughts along the east coast, and the westerly wind just won't leave us alone. So so that's basically what the two systems are, and cooler than average temperatures for us.
Right. Well, that's a very interesting summation, actually. Well, Philip, thank you very much for your time today. That was a fascinating little insight into how the weather works.
My pleasure.
Country 99 TV's own weather analyst, Philip Duncan. We'll be back in a moment with a field report from Tower Sector Report correspondent Drew Chappell on the booming business of lifestyle blocks.
The idyllic picture of lifestyle blocks painted in Kiwi folklore is one of goats, chickens, horses and humans, all living in close harmony with the land. It's estimated there are more than 200,000 properties which fall under the Ministry of Agriculture definition for lifestyle, under 11 hectares with a living unit on site. It's an attractive proposition for retirees, returning expats and townies fed up with the hustle and bustle of city life. Nadine Hall, who edits the popular New Zealand lifestyle block magazine, says there's no hard and fast definition of a lifestyle block owner, but they all have one thing in common.
A lot of the people who read the magazine are people who are in more senior positions. They've worked their way up, they're managers or they're in a position where they can have that disposable income, but if they need to take the day off because the vet's coming, they can actually do that.
And when money isn't much of an issue, there's less concern about generating a profit off the land. Nadine says most people aren't looking to start or supplement a successful business on their blocks, but to enjoy the country air and a bit of peace and quiet.
A lot of people do serious business on their farms. I mean, they do work on their farms, but most people I know work off their farms to support their lifestyle because they love living on the land and having all those animals or gardens or whatever.
A lifestyle choice that more and more people, in cities and in the country, are starting to consider. Since the country's property boom, which peaked in 2008, almost all areas of New Zealand real estate have either levelled off or taken a dive. There is one notable exception though: lifestyle properties remain as popular as ever. Kate Brennan found out firsthand about the market for lifestyle properties after moving to New Zealand from Liverpool in England. She says at the time there was no forum for people with questions about getting a start in rural property, a murky world for the newcomer, often involving buyers in it for a quick buck.
That was the early days of the internet, but also there was very little lifestyle farming then. It was the start of the boom of lifestyle farming, so there weren't even any magazines when we started, so it was quite exciting. We had our land, we needed to know. I went onto the internet and couldn't get any information, so we obviously there was a need there, so we set it up.
Kate decided it was time someone set up a medium to let like-minded people with questions about rural life and property talk to one another. That's when she and a friend started the Lifestyle Block website. 11 years on, and it's the most popular site of its kind in the country. Kate says newcomers to Lifestyle Blocks use it as a troubleshooting tool to answer any nagging questions. So I guess you can sort of put people in touch with others who might know the answers to those questions.
It could be, my chook is walking funny, what's likely to be wrong with it, or what sort of animals should I get, or can anyone recommend a fencer, or anything, just anything. Because we have so many visitors, we have at least 2,000 visitors a day into the discussion groups, and they all help each other. So if somebody comes in Canterbury and says, I need a fencer locally, somebody will pop up locally and give some advice. Somebody says, I want to breed Appleyard ducks, and somebody somewhere else in the country will say, I've done that, this is what you need to do. So yeah, it's not me at all. I just facilitate.
But despite the help that now exists, there is still a high turnover of smaller rural properties and lifestyle blocks. Some commentators suggest that's a result of reality sinking in for new property owners who ultimately return to the city. Hugh Pavlich runs the Performance Urban Planning website and an annual housing affordability survey examining the New Zealand property market. He says lifestyle blocks are a waste of valuable productive land, as well as a disappointment to those who eventually take them on.
But the reality is that people move out to these lifestyle blocks often with no farming experience whatsoever, get out there and own them for a year or so, start realising just what hard work they are, how they're isolated from their friends in the city, their huge travel costs, and before very long they get very sick of it and then decide to move back into town. So we have very, very high churn rates of these lifestyle blocks.
Mr. Pavlich says the market for lifestyle properties is currently thriving off the back of a romanticised view of country life and not reality. The Real Estate Institute collates data from all around the country, including the latest stats on lifestyle properties. CEO Helen O'Sullivan says part of the problem in measuring data on the property's turnover is the definition of what constitutes lifestyle.
The size of the property can vary hugely. The median's around 2 to 2.5 hectares, but they can be anything from half a hectare to 28 hectares. You know, it really depends on the nature of the property and the purpose to which it's put.
Given the accepted median size of a lifestyle property of around 2 hectares, we can get a sense of growth over the past 30 or so years. In 1977, there were just 27,000 recognised lifestyle blocks in the country. Today, 34 years later, there are 200,000. Those passionate about the properties say that's a sign that they're here to stay, along with the people on them.
There is this quite a powerful myth that people come onto blocks and leave after 2 years, and we've actually surveyed our readers and asked them, how long have you been on your block? Where do you want to go? The majority of them have been on their block for between 3 and 10 years, most of them closer to 10 years, and the only reason they're leaving their block is to go to a bigger block. Like, they've got 5 acres and now they realise what they want to do needs 12. So they are leaving their block, but they're not going back to live in town. They're going to continue the lifestyle they've got.
Kate Brennan is a case in point. She's currently in the process of selling her 4-hectare Cambridge property in order to move to Northland, where a 220-acre section awaits. She's certainly not looking to get back into the city.
It's the freedom of life in the country is just wonderful. It's knowing when it last rained, when it's next going to rain. It's knowing, understanding the land. It's being part of it. You know, it's seeing things grow that you put in. So 10 years on our last block, and we planted small trees on large trees, and you know that's the bit where we've buried a horse, and that's the bit where it all just becomes so much more meaningful.
Despite this, though, the recommendation is to try before you buy or lease a property first.
I recommend for people that they lease a property if they can, because you just don't know whether you're going to like, and it's a big investment. You don't want to spend $500,000 on a property and then find out 6 months later you don't like the big drive, or it's costing you a fortune.
In any case, despite the high turnover and horror stories of 2-hour trips to work and 4 a.m. wake-up calls from hungry animals, it seems those who stick with the ideal really do find the lifestyle they seek.
I love living in the country, and there's lots of things I want to do, but I'm on a budget. I've got a big mortgage. I need to be careful. I can't overextend myself. I have responsibilities to animals. I mean, my vet bills are a big part of my budget. If I lived in town and didn't have all these animals, I would have a lot more money. So, I mean, it's a compromise.
Yeah, but you wouldn't go back?
Oh, absolutely not. Never. No, I love living in the country. I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I lived in the city for almost 10 years, and now I live in the country. I just can't ever imagine that I did that.
Welcome back. Next up, we talk rural broadband with the Chief Executive of the Telecommunications Association, Paul Brislin. There's a great deal of talk about the government's rural broadband initiative. Paul predicts rural New Zealand should be fully connected to ultra-fast broadband by 2020. Well, Paul, welcome to Tower Sector Report here on Country 99 TV. Now, let's begin with a pretty broad brush question. All the time we're hearing about proposals for the ultra-fast broadband rollout, but it's all very confusing. There's a hell of a lot of jargon about megabits and bytes and megabit and goodness knows what else. Where is ultra-fast broadband at?
Yeah, so we've got two projects in New Zealand at the moment. We have an ultra-fast broadband project, UFB, that is being run mainly for the cities and urban dwellers. We also have a sister project called the Rural Broadband Initiative, RBI, and that is being run with far less money, but is being aimed at rural New Zealand, the heartland of the country.
Right. And broadband basically will give you much quicker access to the internet.
It does, it does. It enables a whole bunch of things that really slow internet access just don't allow. So we see a lot of uptake of Skype services. This is voice and video calling to people overseas or anywhere in the country at a very, very low cost. A lot of real-time services. So you get a lot of things, particularly in rural New Zealand, that you just don't see today. You know, things that allow you to do online monitoring of milk fat levels, for example. You can use Google Earth to directly map your paddocks, so you know exactly where everything's laid out. All that kind of thing will become second nature.
And you've got to have broadband for that. I mean, people really couldn't have done it with the old dial-up speeds. You can try to do it, but it becomes quite a mission. And having spoken to a few farmers about those who have got entry-level broadband today, they're just starting to see the benefits of it, and you know, they say, give us more speed, more capacity, and we'll do more with it. It's really quite exciting. Well, certainly farming generally is becoming more and more computer reliant, and farmers are becoming more and more computer savvy.
That's right.
So the future really looks quite good for them.
Well, I
hope
they've
got this in place.
That's right. That's right. It's a big project. We're talking about an awful lot of money.
Yeah, and what sort of time frame?
It's scheduled for the rest of the decade, so until 2020 at least, to get everybody connected up. But the goal is there, and it's a fantastic ambition. A lot of countries around the world are doing this, and I think we're in the vanguard of these projects, particularly in regards to rural New Zealand. We really do have to deliver some of the efficiencies that we've seen in urban New Zealand. You think about office workers and how much their lives have changed over the last 20 years with computerisation. We've barely scratched the surface in terms of rural connectivity.
How does our rural broadband rollout compare to what's happening in Australia? I mean, they're spending something like 40 billion odd Australian dollars, aren't they?
They're throwing a lot of money.
But they've got an enormous continent to cover.
They do.
But how do we compare with our level of sophistication?
I think they're using lazy capital. They're simply just throwing money at the problem to make it go away. They can afford to do that. They're spending $12 billion with Telstra simply to buy the copper network as it stands today, to get away from the problem of competing network infrastructures. We simply don't have that sort of money. Our government's being a lot smarter with it. It's being a lot more pragmatic. We're spending $1.5 billion in urban New Zealand and more like about 250 million in rural New Zealand.
I was just going to ask you about that. I mean, the government's very proud. I think I've got the figure here of 285 million.
That'll be about right.
Rural broadband initiative. And of course that's being rolled out by Vodafone with Telecom. So
that's right, yes, yeah. Interesting duopoly, yes, interesting decision.
Exactly,
yeah.
Two competitors joining up together for this. But should Minister Stephen Joyce really be patting himself on the back for the way this has evolved so far?
Well, I think probably so. He's done a good job of steering what could be quite a difficult proposition. You know, New Zealand is a very wrinkly country. We're very low population density, particularly in rural New Zealand. And yet the solution we've got is really about entry-level connectivity. We're talking about 5 megabits a second, which is somewhat less than what we get in. Well, it's better than what farmers have today. So he gets a tick in the box for that. It's not as fast as we would have liked to see. We would have doubled that, maybe even tripled that. As an entry level. Now that will of course increase with time, but I think if we want to make this step change and really get New Zealand rural society up to speed with these kinds of issues and this kind of technology, then we really need to be treating this as a good first step, but we need a second step. We need to see what happens after this.
Right. Am I right in my reading for this interview that schools are going to, rural schools are going to get much faster speeds than individual businesses or homes?
Yeah. They are some of the core components of this network was to roll out 100 megabits a second, so fibre optic cable.
So that's 20 times what...
It is, but you've got to then divide it by the number of people who will be using it, of course. So that's 100 megabits a second to the school. If you've got 100 students, then they're only getting 1 megabit each if they're all on at the same time.
Is that how it works?
And that's one of the big issues here, is that the numbers can be quite misleading. We talk about 5 megabits a second on a particular connection, but if you've got 4 or 5 different households or customers hanging off that connection, then their speed gets reduced by that amount. So that does mean you need more capacity, and fibre optic cable is the way to do that. So the schools will all be linked up by fibre. Part of the deal is that they then run some fibre from the school up to a nearby hill and put a cell phone tower up there for the Vodafone component. And a lot of people will be served off the fixed wireless infrastructure that Vodafone will put in place.
What sort of proportion of customers will get there?
That'll be mostly the residential. Farms, anybody who's outside of the sort of the urban clusters, if you like, they'll probably be on fixed wireless. But again, it'll be hopefully quite competitive. Telecom's already talking about putting equipment on these towers as well. We've got 2 Degrees in there. We've got all the other mobile network partners who may want to offer service as well. So I'm hoping that we have a good competitive environment that leads to a lot of good prices for rural New Zealand, which is something that they haven't had before.
What will happen with the broadband price for those in rural areas?
Well, that's very interesting as well. I'm hoping competition drives down the price, but at the very least we should get exactly the same pricing as you'll see in urban New Zealand. So they're already talking about making no difference in terms of marketing plays between the urban centres getting the UFB project and rural New Zealand. And that's as it should be. We really don't want to have a 2-tier internet system where you've got rural New Zealand being charged more for a lesser service than their urban counterparts.
I think that would be
politically unfair and also economically no good. You know, New Zealand needs to get some of the benefits of this kind of technology at an economic level. And we need that to happen in rural New Zealand.
Indeed. Finally, and very briefly, Paul, what will people in the countryside actually see as this thing is rolled out? Are we going to see trenches being dug over hill and dale?
Oh, I think so. You'll start to see a lot of fibre being laid. Fibre is the backbone of this kind of infrastructure.
It'll mainly be underground?
I believe so, yes. Certainly to a lot of places, it'll be trenched in because it's more secure that way, it's safer. But certainly you'll start to see more cell phone towers being built on hillsides. And this is a good thing because it gives you the capability to get high-speed broadband practically anywhere in New Zealand.
Well, Paul, thank you very much. That was very interesting.
Good.
Thanks for your time. Paul Brislin of the Telecommunications Users Association there. And that's Tower's Sector Report for this week. I'll be back soon with another edition. And remember, you can watch the show on our website. Catch you next time.